And hello everyone who's joined us for this first Impact Circle for 21. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all, and especially the contributors who are helping to make Tech23 happen this year under what can only be called trying circumstances. There's lots planned for the year though, so please check out the website. For those zooming in to be part of the Tech23 Circle for the first time, especially welcome to you. I encourage you all now to say hello and introduce yourselves in the chat, which is also where you're welcome to ask any questions and have conversations alongside the conversation we're all zooming in today to hear and eavesdrop on. The link to Slattery's charter is also found in the chat. That's a guide to the behaviour we encourage at all of our events, whether they're online or offline. There are a lot more Tech23 circles planned for 21, and many more of the recordings from last year can be found on the website. Please note today's circle will also be recorded. Just confirming that we'll be eavesdropping on this wonderful conversation for sort of 30-40 minutes, and then we'll move to a more Q&A with which you're welcome to be part of. And afterwards, we welcome you to stay on the line and connect. So it gives me great pleasure. I'm honoured and I'm incredibly grateful to welcome Sally to kick things off around the ocean's potential.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Really excited to be here today for this important conversation. And I too, as you know, want to pay my respects to the traditional owners on the land on which I'm joining you from today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and just acknowledge the connection to country, to the oceans, to the seas, to the land, and to community, and that continued connection and care for country. So I acknowledge all traditional owners that may be joining us or watching this later, and pay my respects to elders past, present. It is definitely a privilege to join you in your country and contribute to the care of country in this conversation today too. So I'm thrilled to be here. A couple of little reminders for housekeeping. If you're not on mute right now, could you please be on mute, except for my panelists that we're going to have a conversation with, and I'll let you know when you can unmute at the end of this. And if you do have questions that are coming up with the chat, don't hold back just waiting for the moment where we might turn on the mics for everybody. Pop them into the chat function, because I'll be keeping an eye on that. I love to do two things at once and multitask, even though technically science tells us we can't do that well. But I'm actually really curious if things are popping into your heads as you go. I will actually try and weave that into the conversation that we're having as I can as well. So a little bit about me and Cicada Innovations before we kick off. For those of you who don't know us, we are Australia's home of deep tech. We're the oldest and largest deep tech incubator in Australia. We're proud partners and supporters of Tech23 and have been, and we're also really grateful that many of our residents have actually been Tech23 winners and alumni over the years. So we have a collaboration that is actually genuinely built out of a vision to see Australia be a nation that is actually founded on deep tech businesses and complex businesses, and moving from a simple economy to a complex one where science and engineering are solving some of the fundamental challenges that we face in the world. So we're very mission aligned, and we love having conversations like this because it really does take a village and a community to bring transformation and change. So without further ado, you've heard who our panelists are today. I'm going to kick off straight into conversation with them because I think that's what you're all here for. You're not here to listen from me. And I really love, I've got to say, the way that we framed the conversation, or the way that Rachel's framed this today about ocean's potential. Often when we think about the oceans and we talk about it, it's framed in the context of being a challenge and a problem and all the problems that we face with it. But actually there's tremendous opportunity here in this space as well today. And so that's what we're here to unpack. We're here to lift the lid on some of the things that we know that are happening, but also to dig into some of the challenges that we face and what the opportunity is for all of us to engage. So Jas, I'm going to come to you first, because I think you've got this absolute passion and commitment to the ocean and a really big picture perspective around how we need to be engaging for the Ocean Decade and founding Ocean Decade Australia and driving conversations in this space. Can you lay some context for us? You know, what are the challenges? What's the opportunity? What is the potential? And set the scene for us as we dive into the conversation today.
Thanks, Sally, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I also wish to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, where I'm joining you from, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. In terms of the opportunity, it's a really interesting time. There's definitely something in the water for ocean right now. The public discourse around ocean is growing in volume. And I think in part that's because we are seeing this link and ocean literacy is improving, such that people can see that our health is linked to ocean and planetary health. And when we start making those connections, we start to actually really put value on the sorts of services that our ecosystems are delivering to us, both ocean and planetary. So I think that link and the desire to assign value is definitely an opportunity, and we're starting to see opportunities as a result of doing that. The global picture for ocean is also very exciting. So a group of us founded Ocean Decade Australia at the beginning of this year. And that was really to bring, I guess, visibility to this very big initiative, the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It's not the only thing that's happening for ocean, either for Australia or globally, but that does provide us with a really fabulous framework that outlines opportunities and outcomes that we could be aiming for. And also it does articulate the challenges that, that we see for the ocean. A lot of people do know that the ocean provides us with more than 50% of the oxygen that the planet needs. It is a carbon sink, and it also provides protein, is a major source of protein for over 1 billion people a year. So in that very big kind of way, I think there's just a lot there. I think it's the assigning of value though, and there's a bunch of things around that that's really interesting. If you haven't heard about the system for environmental economic accounting, that's definitely part of this picture, and we're starting to develop that as a country.
Thanks, Jas. I love the notion of value and assigning value to something, because what you value, you'll spend time, money and effort on engaging with and preserving and protecting. So I think it's a really interesting one to think about, and thinking about value. Sam, I want to throw over to you, because you are working in that value space, really, I think, with the work that you're doing with Sea Forest. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what it is you do in a nutshell, and, you know, what's your elevator pitch for Sea Forest? What is it you do, and what's that opportunity with seaweed? Because I think sometimes when we think about oceans, we do go down that sort of, you know, it is all about, you know, the environment and things like that. But there's actually, it's not an either or. It's not a binary thing of it's environment or it's opportunity from a commercial perspective. Tell us all of the things, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. And so, yeah, I guess with Sea Forest, I mean, the two go hand in hand, really, because we've got basically what Sea Forest does is we cultivate a seaweed, a native Australian seaweed called Asparagopsis. And that seaweed has been found by the CSIRO in 2016 and in animal trials to eliminate methane in ruminants. And so at a very, very small dietary inclusion, we're talking about 0.2% dietary inclusion of this seaweed, stops something that is, you know, responsible for about between 13 and 15% of Australia's emissions. That's the methane emissions from livestock production. And so, you know, that was a remarkable finding back in 2016, but there was no one driving the commercial cultivation of this seaweed in the world. So that seaweed was, they got that from the Barrier Reef, which they went diving to get for the research trials. So, and what's really interesting about the way the seaweed works is that it disrupts the enzymatic pathway that leads to the production of methane, and in stopping methane, it also converts that which would have been expelled by the animal as a gaseous waste product into energy, which the animal uses to grow. So we get an increase in productivity as well as an environmental outcome. So it's a really great story, I think, of a developing industry in the seaweed aquaculture industry, working with the livestock industry in Australia to provide a global competitive advantage. But yeah, so I think just as Jas sort of alluded to, the importance of ocean science is critical to be able to cultivate seaweed in Australia and develop this industry, which is fundamentally environmentally positive. Seaweeds, as we know, grow very, very quickly, 30 to 60 times faster than land-based plants. There is an enormous amount of ocean that we can use to cultivate seaweed, but in addition, it's referred to as a zero input crop. So we don't have to water it. It doesn't rely on finite resources. So we don't need fertilizers, for example. And so, really it just relies on, it lives in its food source, and it relies on the sunlight and temperature for growth and productivity. So, but our journey with Sea Forest started with science. We had to learn how to cultivate the seaweed, and seaweeds have incredibly complex life cycles. They're nothing like terrestrial farming. So our seaweed, for instance, has 3 life phases. It all starts with, answering questions of nature, but using science to do so, and then ensuring that what we're doing in terms of our cultivation methods are as sustainable as possible. But yeah, so I do believe that there's, this is one story, but there is just such enormous potential, particularly in Australia, to develop a seaweed aquaculture industry, but also to restore seaweed habitat, because as we're aware, the ocean is infinitely larger than the atmosphere, and there is an enormous potential for it to utilising marine ecosystems to draw down enormous amounts of CO2 and provide a positive environmental benefit. So yeah, thrilled to be a part of this developing space, and I think that there's a lot that we can develop in terms of our understanding of native seaweeds. Whether it be for the extraction of complex carbohydrates for pharmaceutical use, or feeding of it to livestock, all the way down to fertilizers, for example. There and also, as I mentioned, as I'm a huge fan of ULUU and the work being done by Julia and the team around turning seaweeds into plastics, for example.
That's a beautiful segue, which to Julie, who I'm going to come to in a second, but I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said there, because I think it's really powerful to unpack it. So one, first of all, congrats and kudos on growing such a big team and growing this industry. I think it's phenomenal. I think before the show, you were telling us you're onboarding 20 something new people tomorrow, which is just, incredible growth. But what I really love what you talked about was, you are solving a planetary problem, but you're not just solving a planetary problem in terms of oceans and, being able to use that zero impact crop or use that, but you're actually changing an output for farmers as well, in, reducing methane, but actually giving a better cow. And building a better cow, so to speak. So it's really interesting and fascinating that when we talk about investment and investing, I think sometimes, and we'll come back to that in a little bit, but people often think about you're either investing for a commercial return or you're impact investing, but actually in this case, it's like you're covering all the bases with what you're doing, which is just fantastic. So massive congrats, and good segue into Julia from ULUU. So Julia, big fan, because I've been involved with you guys for quite some time now, many months. I think what you're doing is really, really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that ULUU's doing in this value sort of space of what you're trying to do, the challenge that you're trying to solve, and the opportunity that you're trying to go after?
Thank you, Sally, and thank you everybody for being here. So ULUU is an emerging startup, and we are fully focused on developing a biomaterial that is for the oceans, but also with the oceans. And what we're very excited about this material is that, first of all, it's very versatile, which means that it can replace fossil fuel-based plastics. So we tackle that problem. That's a problem that I'm very enthusiastic about. I've been studying that problem for about 10 years now. And what is very exciting as well is that it can replace the plastic, but also it is both carbon negative, which means that we remove more carbon pollution than we emit when producing the material, and is also truly biodegradable, and which means that when you use ULUU, you can home compost, for instance, which is we're very excited about it. So it's home compostable. And in terms of how we produce the material, so it's a clean process, and it uses ocean resources, including seawater, saltwater microbes, and seaweed, which Sam already spoke lots about. So I'm very enthusiastic to see so many startups emerging on that space, because indeed, seaweed is an awesome marine plant that not only grows very quick, but it also can clean up our oceans out of like nasty nutrient pollution that comes out of our runoff. And it can also empower, of course, coastal communities. And in seaweed in particular, if we look at the economy that already exists around the world, there is lots of female farmers. So you have the husband as the fisherman, and then the female complement revenue with farming seaweed. So as we grow the demand for seaweed, we're going to be empowering those communities through female empowerment as well, which I am quite excited about. So that's a little bit about our work at ULUU and why we
thank you, Julia, and it's fantastic. For those of you who don't know the ULUU journey, I've had the privilege of watching it over, oh gosh, the past 9 months or so, I think, really, as part of the StartMate program, of which I'm a mentor and supporter of, and got to be the partner for the team during the program, and to see the growth and actually what they've managed to achieve in this time, it does get me really excited about the opportunity for seaweed. But you could be mistaken by thinking that this is a panel that's all about seaweed and the opportunity for seaweed in Australia and the seaweed industry. It's not the ocean's potential, it's the seaweed potential, but it's really not. Like oceans, I think, as we want to unpack in this conversation, is there is so much opportunity in that space. You know, there is so much good work being done by not-for-profits, by for-profits, lots of people engaging. Nick, I want to come to you with Ocean Impact Organisation. You know, you run challenges to unearth sort of, you know, solutions and things in this space and really kind of bring visibility and opportunity with industry to connect on that. What are some of the things that get you most excited about what you're seeing come through in this space? And, you know, bonus points if they're not all seaweed related, but it's okay if they are.
Well, we are seeing a lot in seaweed, so that's that's great. But I mean, we ran a pitch fest last year, the Ocean Impact Pitch Fest. 2020 was our first year. We received around 200 applications. Half of those were from Australia, and we were really blown away by the breadth of things that people were working on. So there was a range of seaweed initiatives in there. There was a heap of plastic reduction ventures, everything around circular economy, product and packaging design, waste collection and recycling, you name it. New business models to get around the use of single-use plastic packaging. Lots going on there. Aquaculture itself is a big space. We talk about a global population moving to 9 or 10 billion people shortly. Aquaculture is seen as, you know, a potential savior and a large source of protein for that growing population. So we're seeing lots and lots of developments there around aquaculture. And what's exciting about it is that traditionally it's had a little bit of a bad rap in terms of the environmental impact of aquaculture, the use of antibiotics, the use of chemicals, the fact that it has a feed to output ratio in a lot of cases that's more than 1, which essentially means that we're catching more fish to feed the fish that ends up on your plate, which is pretty alarming when you consider that global fish stocks are in fairly bad shape. But so we're seeing lots of things around the existing way that we think about aquaculture, but then there's also some exciting areas which haven't really been looked at scale yet, and that's land-based aquaculture and offshore aquaculture. There's, I could be wrong, but I think the biggest funded CRC in Australia at the moment is the Blue Economy CRC, based down in Tasmania, and their remit is all around offshore aquaculture powered by renewable energy with a really high degree of automation. So, I mean, that's really exciting, seeing developments in that space. We're seeing a lot around fishing tech as well. So overfishing is a huge problem. Bycatch is an enormous problem. So fishing tech to reduce bycatch, and conversely fishing tech that actually works to attract the right type or the target catch is exciting. Lots happening in ocean energy. We were really blown away by seeing the number of ocean energy ventures that are out there. Look, a lot are very early stage, and it's you know, debatable how many of them will reach any commercial potential anytime soon. But if you think about Australia, we have an enormous coastline. We have a huge opportunity with the right support. And if we take a decent long-term view, to be a real powerhouse in wind, wave, tidal, the lot there. So really exciting stuff. And look, from our point of view, Ocean Impact Organisation really exists in a nutshell to find more Julias and more Sams and give them the support that they need and build an ecosystem around them. Because to date, the way we looked at things when we spotted a gap was that all of the individual ecosystem elements are there, and nothing is plugging them, or nothing is bringing early stage innovation and plugging them all in and giving them an identity to get behind. And similarly with philanthropic efforts and investors and so forth, we know that if we can bring all of those different ecosystem stakeholders together, we can do a hell of a lot more as a group than working individually.
I love that last line about we can do more together than what we could do individually. So we've had a conversation earlier about this, about what that could look like. So I'm going to just throw open to my panelists. You get to first hand on the buzzer, so to speak, gets to go in. What are some of those opportunities and the things that we need to be thinking about? Because there's some things in everything that you've said, like there is tremendous potential, and with great power, we all know what the second part of that phrase comes great responsibility. So what are the things that we need to actually get right as levers to get Australia engaged, to get the world engaged on the potential of the oceans and the urgency of some of the things? And I'll throw open to anybody on my panel to kind of kick that off.
I'm happy to have a go at that, Sally. And I guess one of the things that we're seeing is just that need to really have the stakeholders kind of open the book, if you like, on making sure the ocean stakeholders know who each other are. It might not occur to fishers that banking and finance and reinsurance industries are quite interested in what's happening in the ocean, and vice versa. So I think there's a need to understand the stakeholder groups. We have actually defined up a group of 16 different clusters, I guess, of stakeholders as we've done the work that we've done over the last 6 months. We've interviewed over 200 people in that time. We've got thousands of data points. There's a real coalescence around what people are wanting to see. But first of all, there's just knowing about one another. So we've had fashion come to those conversations, energy, as Nick mentioned before, fishing, shipping, tourism, and the finance sector as well. And I just think that actually knowing that there's all these different types of stakeholders who all feel that they have a stake in the ocean, and a serious one, is the first part of that. So just knowing each other and acknowledging that, and then figuring out how they can work together. And I'll give a simple example, which was a story told to me by a fisher, where this person was oversighting a massive fishery, and without realising that it was going to happen, there was a big survey that occurred by a big oil and gas group in the fishery. And it's just that coordination between the users of the ocean that, that's a little bit like someone coming into your office and, digging a hole in it and leaving. So just coordination is part of that key as well. First of all, we've got to know each other.
I would just add to that point, if you don't mind, Jas.
Yeah, please.
There is enormous and remarkable potential inside the ocean, that we have to harness, whether it be for renewable energy or for seaweed cultivation or for more sustainable aquaculture. I would just think that there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from terrestrial farming and some of the practices of the past that we need to take a very careful environmental approach to the way in which we do things to ensure that we are in fact having a net positive impact through our activities. And I think that's a really important message to get across when we're thinking about the potential that we're not exploiting just purely for commercial purposes, but that we're trying to install some positive environmental impact.
Yeah,
I love that point. And so to follow on that point, and this is a question for both Julia and Sam in particular, but what do you do as you're thinking about this? Because you are both looking to harness the potential of the ocean and seaweed, but how do you think about that in a sustainable way, and what safeguards do you put in place yourselves in your own businesses that you're working on to actually take that responsibility, because it's a new industry, right? I mean, my background is tech, and I worked in big tech for quite a number of years, and the unintended consequences of what seems to be good sometimes aren't necessarily felt till decades later. We're talking about that with ethical AI right now, and that is a conversation for definitely another circle. But what do you do to do that? And as you're building out these brand new industries in seaweed and looking at this huge potential market, how do you think about it? What do you do? I'd love to hear from both of you.
Maybe I will kickstart there. I think, like, if I would put it down to one name, is governance. And in terms of internal governance, I think I'm very optimistic, because I've seen this growth in like impact investment and how do we measure success in business. And one of the things is profit, because we want impact at scale, and to scale, it's you need that profit to keep increasing. But also you need to come up with other metrics on how you're going to measure your success going forward and scaling up. So at ULUU, we're very lucky to be able to create an ecosystem around us, including our investors, where they are measuring ourselves, benchmarking ourselves, not only on revenue and how we're going to build the business model, but also making sure that those metrics, be it from the SDGs at the UN or be some other numbers that we come up with, that is reported, and that our whole supply chain is aware of that. So things like, for instance, in our case, we carbon negative. Okay, so going forward, we're going to be measuring how much carbon we're removing. And that means having a transparent system that measures the amount of energy we use in our plant, that starts to measure how much biomass of the seaweed is being removed to the seafloor, which is a big part of why we're carbon negative. The biochar, which is a fertilizer that we put in the soil, and the carbon stays there. So putting metrics around that, and starting to measure success, not only with profit, but also the other things that you want to do when it comes to impact in our ocean. So
I love that. Sam?
I'd absolutely agree with Julia there. It's all about creating for Sea Forest as well a zero waste system, where we are thinking about every aspect of what we're doing in the activities. But in addition to the processing side of things, I think one of the things that's happened for Australia, the seaweed industry is $13 billion global industry, and yet is less than $1 million in Australia, because the 9 major species cultivated around the world are Northern Hemisphere endemic. So you couldn't even get a permit to cultivate them in Australia. So this whole thing around biosecurity and cultivating native species is absolutely critical when we're thinking about how we're going to what we're going to grow and where. So we're fortunate where Sea Forest has one of the largest leases in the Southern Hemisphere, marine leases in the Southern Hemisphere, is in an area where the Asparagopsis is wildly abundant and annually abundant. It's the reason that led us there in the first place. But so we can get a permit to cultivate, or we have a permit to cultivate Asparagopsis, but you wouldn't be able to get a permit, for example, to cultivate nori if you wanted to make sushi. But having said that, there's something like 14,000 species of recorded species of seaweed in the world, and Australia is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet for seaweed. So there is huge potential, and we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of our understanding of our native seaweeds. And so we're really excited to be growing Asparagopsis, growing a lot of it, but also in discovering lots of these other amazing native seaweeds and their interesting flavor profiles, and even some of them that are used complex carbohydrates that are used to extract things like fucoidins or sulfated galactans and things that are used for bioceuticals.
I love the way that you're thinking about it. I want to dig into this a bit more, but I just want to acknowledge that I do see the questions that are coming through on the chat, and we're going to come to those. So if you've got questions, keep popping them in there, because we will get to them, I promise. One of the things that you both talked about was the opportunity, and it is a new industry. Going to throw open to the panel again. With every new industry and with every new opportunity, it seems like sometimes the industry moves ahead of policy, and this industry moves ahead, sometimes ahead of investment as well. So how, what does that look like? What are, maybe to all of the panel, what are you seeing as the appetite from both a policy lens and a investment lens, and where's maybe the gap that we could actually encourage people that are joining the circle today to go out and advocate for or make a difference in?
I was going to wait on Nick to answer that one around investment.
I could talk just a little bit about carbon credits and the Clean Energy Regulator and the way the government's looking at the opportunity for carbon commerce in the ocean. And the Blue Economy CRC is a perfect example, but I think there is a swell of interest just purely shown by the number of people on this panel, joining this this group circle. Thank you, Sally. That want to see solutions driven in the ocean, but I think one of the important things, and one of the things I've only learned about fairly recently, is this concept of additionality. If we start too soon, then we're in fact excluded from the opportunity. And so in relation to the method development with the Clean Energy Regulator, you really do have to wait until those methods are accepted and then approved before you engage in the activity. Otherwise, you're excluded from getting access to things like carbon credits. So it's just it's a process. And I would say that in the case of the ocean, we're all learning at a rapid pace, but we also have to wait for due process before we can kind of capitalize on those opportunities.
Nick, Jas, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I might just add something to the process part there. That's so I completely agree with that. From our point of view, we've been having a lot of investor conversations, and it turns out that a lot of the early people that we've been speaking to and having our network are also ocean conservation and philanthropists. And they're really conscious of, to really get things going, philanthropy is the first step in a lot of cases. So that could be it can be for trials, it can be for research. But these people also they wear two hats. They have their philanthropy hat, they have their investment hat, and they're ready to invest when the time's right. But I think the steps are normally in their mind: philanthropy, government support, a critical mass of investor interest. And then, as Sam says, if in parallel to that, you're getting the science, the policy, and the regulatory side right, if we do all those things right, then we have all the ingredients for the capital to pile in at the right time.
Yeah. I think that brings the work, full circle to Jas, to the work that you're trying to do to raise the conversation around the importance of oceans beyond basically the marine biologists in the room and the scientists, but actually engage, broader community stakeholders and that diverse group of stakeholders to be part of this and to understand the opportunity and the full potential that could be realised. I'm conscious that we're getting lots of questions coming in here, and because I'm lazy and don't want to have to scroll back, I'm actually going to start asking some of those to the panel. So our narrative might weave and duck a little bit from here, but I do want to ask some of these. And thank you, James, for being like the most engaged questioner. Great to have you joining us. But I want to look at the first one. The one is around energy, right? We've been talking a lot about seaweed and how that is actually a carbon sink and what the opportunity is. And there's lots of different product outputs that can be out there that are really beneficial, and there's huge market opportunity. Wave energy and tidal. Does anybody see, or has anybody seen anything making a significant impact on the energy mix there? And what are some of the challenges? Now, full disclosure, wave and tidal energy is not my area of expertise, but I think working in the ocean is pretty complex. But is there anything that any of our panelists have seen and have a view on that?
There's an amazing project, and Nick and I think both know about this one, which is being planned out of Western Australia down south, which is an Australian ocean energy project, a demonstration project, and looking at the full mix from deep sea and the opportunity for offshore wind energy, which we don't currently have a lot of. There are some big projects like that, and then coming into tidal and wave energy solutions. And there was an Ocean Pitch Fest, I think runner-up last year, who actually is part of that demonstration project in Albany. And then onto land. The issue there, though, which is where the terrestrial and the ocean meet, is around the network, the actual grid, and how we bring those resources, capture as possible, but then how we're actually going to feed that into our grid. An amazing leader in that space, Miranda Taylor, and also Alex Ogg, who I've spent a bit of time talking to about those opportunities. But that's a huge opportunity for Australia. We are surrounded by those natural resources, and there's just a huge opportunity there, particularly also because the demonstration project is looking at how it would do that in remote sites, so that it's almost energy in a box as an idea, but you could then pick that as an idea up and move it to remote communities and provide energy in a way that you haven't before. So watch this space on that one. I did put the link in the chat, but that's one of the really exciting ones that I've seen.
Nick, if there's anything you want to add to that?
Look, I was going to add something, but I've just seen something in the chat from Stephanie Thornton, who was one of the people had many chats with about this, and various others. So, speaking to Stephanie and others in this space, when it comes to the obstacles or challenges so far, it's not uncommon, I suppose, but in particular to ocean energy, one of the issues over the years has been that people have been focusing on the tech rather than the customer in the first instance, and trying to come up with something that taps into the grid is really not that simple or cheap. And it's only sort of relatively recently, I suppose, that people are starting to think about the use cases in mind and look at smaller scale things like, okay, right, can we power a desal plant? Can we power a remote aquaculture setup somewhere? So, I think now that there is organisations like the Australian Ocean Energy Group getting behind that sort of customer focus, we hopefully will see some advances in the near term.
And for those of you who can't see in the chat that may be watching this video later, Stephanie is going to, at the end of this, when we get into, get a chance to have a conversation, I'm going to, Stephanie can share that with a group of people with her knowledge on there. But encourage you, and a big shout out to go follow the Australian Ocean Energy Group for those of you who may be watching this at a later date. I want to ask another question, because I'm conscious of time. There's another big sort of top area that we've touched on a little bit, but no one's really dived into it. And we did have a conversation when we met last week about this, is about aquaculture and fisheries. And there's a couple of questions around what can we learn from land-based or oceans-based and things like that. But it has had some controversy, right? Like the process of it, and it is. Sam, you had some really interesting, Jas, I know you had some thoughts on this too, but Sam, you had some really interesting points about this last week when we were chatting about habitat and conservations and solutions, and being really careful in I think you phrased it as being careful in the questions that we ask of nature. Can either one of you recap some of that conversation that we had? Because I think it was quite rich, and it wasn't the headline that we sometimes see, which actually doesn't go into the nuance of some of both the challenges and the opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Jas, are you happy for me to start? Yes, I think one of the things is, we talk about aquaculture as having a bit of a bad rap, and certainly it has a long way to go in terms of improving its sustainability credentials. And I think, to one of those points that Nick made early on about using more fish to grow fish than in fact the protein that it's in fact growing. These days, a lot of the salmon farms are using poultry, and as a way, and it's a byproduct. So utilizing a byproduct to create what they think is a zero waste system. Yes, I believe that there are further improvements, but I also think when you zoom out and you look at this whole ocean in perspective, and the health of our ocean in perspective, we're seeing that it's increased in acidity as a result of being, the world's second largest carbon sink, but it's also been largely fished out. We have about 3% of the wild population of fish left in our oceans. That's huge. And what are we going to do to feed ourselves with a future protein source if we want to keep eating seafood? And I think aquaculture has a role to play there in terms of being able to provide us that protein source. And it's a personal view, but I think we should probably take the pressure off those wild populations and enable them the opportunity to recover. And I think, just to your point that you made, Sally Ann, we do have to think seriously and use science to ask those questions of the ocean. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And what is the net impact? And I think there is pros and cons, and there is nothing that we can do, including seaweed farming, that doesn't have an impact. We grow our seaweed on structures that are 5 meters below the surface. We're fortunate to be utilizing underwater structures that were already in place before we came along. But in order to grow this, we'll grow 7,000 tons of seaweed next year, and that will that will obviously draw down a lot of, or capture a lot of carbon, but it's also significant activity that wasn't there before. So all of these things are important, that we're asking the right questions and being conscious of the ecological impact that we're having.
Can I just add a quick point there?
Yeah.
And one thing is also for us as humans to realize that we can help as well make those activities more sustainable, particularly around what you eat. So just if you think about it, like let's say a salmon or a tuna, it eats lots of little fish before you get that one. So it's very hard to create a aquaculture that's sustainable. But if we realize that and go to, like, let's say sardines, or for instance, shellfish, which we didn't speak about, but it is a bit like the seaweed. It can even be good for the environment. So I think there is a role there that we all can play as well around what we eat from the oceans, and try to change those habits of, okay, maybe I don't eat so much tuna and I'll start to eat more sardine, for instance, which is lower on the supply chain, on the food chain, for those that know. So I think that is important to realize that, and something that I'm trying to do on my own life, to just start to grab those fish that we know that we can scale with sustainable practices.
Yeah, and also, the other thing is that not only have the oceans been, fished out, but they've also lost a lot of their marine habitat, which used to provide shelter, for marine life. So we have in Tasmania, we have 4% left of our natural kelp forests. It's a huge loss of habitat that we wouldn't see, when we go boating. And that's often the case, that what's under the water is not necessarily, in particular in Tasmania, because it's so bloody cold. But the restoration of these habitats is something I'd love to see sea forest play a role in, given the fact that we're so engaged in seaweed science.
Yeah.
Another angle on the seafood industry, I think it's an important player. Obviously, we can't have a conversation about ocean without talking about fisheries and oil and gas and other things that we might sometimes steer away from. But in one of the conversations that I was lucky enough to be part of, one of the questions that we can all be asking when we're ordering our seafood dinner, when we get to go back to a restaurant one day, is where does my fish come from? And actually, from a market perspective, be actually actively asking proactively, I want to know the provenance of my food. And if the restaurant can't tell you, then maybe you might give them the message that you won't be purchasing their seafood. That I think, that action, I think, can be really powerful. But to the point earlier that you made, Julia, around measurement, I think that is really key here. These metrics that both you and Sam and Nick have talked about, for me, is really coming back to that measurement question. You're doing all of these amazing things. How are we capturing that as a nation, as individuals and individual organisations, but as a country? How are we actually going in this space? And I think that's a really big part of what we would like to see as part of this Ocean Decade, that we actually have the metrics that tell us whether we're moving forward or backward.
I love this conversation, and I love how collaborative we're getting. with moving forward. And so I actually am going to draw the formal part of this to a close after one more round from all the panelists. And then we're actually going to be able to go into the circle part where the formal conversation is dissolved. I think, I'll hand back to the team at Slatterys. But what I want to do is, I do think there's a real call to action, right? I think there's a real opportunity for us. Sometimes when we think about challenges, we think they're too big. What could little old me do? I'm not Sam, I'm not Julia, I'm not building those companies, I'm not Nick and Jas, I'm not running these organizations engaging in it. But as we've just heard, there is actually a personal call to action that we can do. And we've seen some of those things in the chat today about organizations that you can engage with and follow up. And I want to go around the room to the group and ask them in a minute what their call to action is. But I'm going to give my own first to give an example. So Rachel mentioned earlier in the chat that, in addition to my day job, I sit on a number of boards. And one of the not-for-profits that I happen to sit on the board of is OzOcean. And OzOcean's entire mission is to help the ocean through tech. And we share the same love of the ocean as what all of our panelists do today. And what we try and do is use affordable, scalable technology to build solutions. And so I want to tell you about two things that you can do. So other than going and checking out the OzOcean website, one is we work with schools to engage a community of students and teachers around Australia, particularly in South Australia right now, to actually build scalable technology and rigs that we can deploy in fixed places to monitor the ocean health. And not only to monitor it with sensors that are actually collecting data and making it available to do citizen science projects and actually engage a future generation of scientists in STEM, but we actually capture imagery. So right now on the coast down in Whyalla, the giant cuttlefish are breeding and gathering. And we've got a camera that was built and on a rig that was built and deployed by a local school that is down there with a live feed to YouTube. And you can go see the cuttlefish in this phenomenal habitat doing what they do. And it's just incredible. And it's absolutely beautiful. So my call, I've got multiple calls of action. And because I'm the moderator, I get to, ask for them. So my call to action is go look at that YouTube video, share the work of Network Blue, which is part of OzOcean, and consider donating to it because it is a not-for-profit. And, this is about engaging all generations in the story because those kids go home and talk to their parents and their parents might be working in all sorts of industries and wouldn't even be thinking about the ocean and what they're doing, but their kids are a connection to the conversation to them. So that's number one. Number two is I just want to share with you about habitat work, and this will be some research work that you can find on the OzOcean website as well. But in partnership with Sean, who is a marine biologist working at Adelaide University, who also sits on the board of OzOcean with Alan Noble, our founder, and myself, we've actually been doing some work around rebuilding reefs and attracting substrates. And actually it turns out that if you can put a speaker and play some reef sounds in a waterproof thing and deploy it in a place at the right time, you can actually attract substrates and oysters to come to it and attach themselves to whatever you put there. Doesn't need to be big, and actually start reforming a habitat and an environment. It's incredibly low cost, it's incredibly effective, and it's going really well. So it's been a research project. It's not something that will probably be commercialized. It's something though that we need to think about. So if you've never seen that, engage with it, go along and check it out and be a part of that. And please engage with OzOcean. The mission is really big. The team is really, really tiny, but we're there to support you. And so if people are out there wanting to do things like that, we'd love to connect with you. So that's my call to action. So everybody better have done that. If you haven't actually started taking notes right now, I'm going to be very disappointed in all attendees. You didn't get to come here just to eavesdrop on a conversation. You came here because you want to make a difference and make an impact. So that's the first one. Going to go round robin around the room in the same order as that I started the conversation. Jas, what's your call to action? What is it that you want everybody who is live now today online, but also watching this in the future to do?
Fantastic, Sally-Ann, thank you. I'm actually going to throw on another hat, which is as the chair of the Sydney Institute of Marine Science, and it's a little link to what you were just talking about. We have a project there called the Living Seawalls initiative, and Living Seawalls is all about making sure that any infrastructure built on or in the ocean, on the coast or in the ocean, actually is thoughtful not only about the humans who might use that infrastructure, but also the environment. So living seawalls, actually I'll put up the link, but we actually attach panels that speaks to so much of what people have talked about today, that create environments where small organisms can go. And by doing that, we can actually increase the biodiversity. We see that happen almost immediately as soon as it starts happening. It's one of the most amazing initiatives. Imagine all of our infrastructure actually having these seawalls on them and creating spaces for little organisms that can grow populations around them. So have a look at that one. Thank you.
Love it. Awesome. Sam, call to action.
Yeah, okay. Well, so as part of, having so many remarkable scientists on the team at Sea Forest, we are working on developing the Sea Forest Foundation, and that is dedicated to the restoration of these underwater ecosystems, in particular. The fundamental to these benthic temperate ecosystems is macrocystis. So that's one of the fastest growing plants on the planet. It grows 2 feet a day. And having closed the life cycle and having the capacity to grow that onto little stones, we hope to, in the coming year, be restoring hectares of habitat of this Australian native seaweed that we hope will become the fundamental basis for restoring whole ecosystems and become a shelter for a lot of marine life and restore some balance in the ocean. So I think if we're not quite there yet, but if anybody who's interested in following along, please subscribe to our website at seaforest.com.au and we'll keep you posted on our progress.
And I love that, Sam, and I'm going to connect you. Catherine Larkin, Queen Kath from OzOcean is actually on here today, and she posted a link to the OzOcean YouTube channel for things, but I think we'd probably love to have a chat and find out more about your restoration stuff and ours and see if there's an opportunity, dobbing her in as a board member for some work. So sorry, Kath, #sorry, not sorry. Julia, what's your call to action?
There it is. I have 2. The first one, I think it might be more like a reminder rather than a call to action, but it's coming back a little bit on your point, like how do we make the ocean stakeholders really care for the ocean while also using the ocean to tackle those human challenges? And what I feel and I see in recent years is that that's a move that's coming bottom up. So it's just for us to remember that we have a massive role, both as a citizen and as a consumer, on going forward. So please don't lose your hope and realize that as an individual, you do play a role. Let's say ULUU. We are a premium product right now, right? So we cannot compete yet with fossil plastics. But when you talk with big brands, they want ULUU because they see that they're selling more. They will sell more if it's made of ULUU rather than fossil plastic. So that's being driven by us as consumers. And when it comes to policy, vote to the people that they are building the future that's going to be thriving for our kids and our grandkids. So that's more of a reminder. And in terms of a smaller call to action, ULUU, if you look at our website now, it's quite like boring and very early. And but Michael, my co-founder, and I, we've been working hard to launch a new website, and it's going to be launched in about 10 to 15 days. So just keep an eye on our website, and you're going to have lots of things about our process and also our team, which is growing quite a lot. So yeah, just keep an eye on our ulu.com.au website.
Love it. Last but not least, Nick, call to action. I know you've got one.
Sure. I have 2. Firstly, the first one is the power of the crowd is really important. So Sally, you mentioned the CAM in Whyalla. What you didn't mention was that was crowdfunded, right? So that was like, the power of the crowd is super, super powerful for the ocean, in my opinion, because I think that's the driver of almost everyone that's involved in it, whether you're an investor, a philanthropist, a scientist, is your passion for it. So my first call to action is go and follow the likes of Sam and Julia, find out the great businesses that are out there that are trying to make a change, follow what they're doing, share the hell out of it, give these guys some love. We need to grow awareness in the space. The second thing is next week, Tuesday, the 10th of August, we launch the 2nd year of our Ocean Impact Pitch Fest, where we'll be uncovering and celebrating and accelerating ventures from all around the world that are having an impact on ocean health. So We have $150,000 worth of cash up for grabs. We have that again in support packages from our partners, and an exciting tech partnership to announce on Tuesday that feeds into that. So have a look out for that, and go and like and follow, and check out all the people we uncover.
Yeah.
Sally, I didn't know everyone was going to get 2. I want one more.
You can have one more just because it's your birthday.
My birthday. The way that I loved what Julia had to say, the way at Ocean Decade Australia we talk about that big call to action is, from our perspective, we have one client, and it's the ocean. Everyone else is a stakeholder. You start throwing that up as your lens, then decision making becomes extremely easy as a voter, as a consumer, as a business owner, etc. One client, it's the ocean. So everyone on this chat, make that the idea, and then from there, easy decisions.
I love it. What I love most about this, and the reason that I almost always wrap up any conversation I have with a call to action, is it's a real reminder to everybody that you can choose right now to be a passive listener, or you can choose to be an active participant. So, we all have an opportunity to choose. And it sounds cheesy to be the change that you want to see in the world, but actually you have that choice. And so I really want to challenge everybody that is watching this and participating to participate. Find one of those things, find the thing that makes your soul sing and kind of really engages you, and just do it. And even if you think your world doesn't, you don't make a difference because you're not an investor, or you're not in politics, or you're not, in charge of a giant corporation that can make a difference. The reality is that we all have a sphere of influence and sphere of control. And our sphere of control is what's directly in control. And that might just be our family. It might be our friends. It might be that. But the sphere of influence is so much bigger, and it's a much more important thing, right? We can do what we can do. We can make those choices about what we eat, what we buy, what we consume, all of those things, how we spend our money and our time. But who we can influence, you never know who you're going to influence and what they might be in control of and might be able to drive change. And so I just want to encourage everybody here, as we do wrap up this sort of formal part of the conversation, to actually be that, and to do that, and to consciously engage. You've been given so many tips and tricks of where to start. You have absolutely no excuses. There is no excuse for doing nothing. And what I'd love you to do is, when you do this, I'd like you to actually go onto your social media platforms and your networks and your groups and tell people about this video. Rachel and the team at Slatterys are going to post it again, so that you're actually sharing that. So if that's the one thing that you do when it goes live, do that, but tell people to get engaged. Make a commitment right now. If you've thought of something that you're going to do, make a commitment right now. Get your phones out. This is the only time you're allowed to double screen, although all of you off camera have probably been doing that already. Get out your phone, share one of those links, share 2 of those links. Like, tell people to get online and engage. Tell them to give money to, Oz Ocean. We'd love it. Passionate plea. Tell them, tag Tech23, tag Slatterys, and say, these are the conversations that matter. There's going to be a whole lot more of them happening over the coming months as we lead up to Tech23. And really, honestly, if you want to see Australia lead in this space, and not just in oceans, but in tech, in broader deep tech, you need to be a part of it. And so there's 0 excuses. We've given you none. We've given you the roadmap of how to go forward. So the only 2 things left for me to do is to thank my panelists. You're awesome. You need to continue being awesome and go out and do amazing things in the world. And to hand back to Rachel to tell us what the informal part of this might look like or be, because that part I did admit I read the instructions, but no, I've forgotten at this point because I'm too excited about telling everybody to go do something, because really I do.
Well, no, thank you, and happy birthday to Jas, and thank you to Sam and Nick and Julia. And yeah, it was fantastic, Sally. Thank you. It was a shot of optimism and positivity that we really needed. And I also think it epitomised everything Tech23 is and wants to be and has tried to do over 13 years, which is, to make great things happen, great people have to connect first. So watching you all in action has just, as I said, been a welcome anecdote for, no, I said the wrong thing. Anyway, you know what I mean, the shot in the arm. So thank you.